Today's episode is brought to you by DeSanto Propane. DeSanto Propane is 4 generations strong as a trustworthy family-owned business with unmatched customer service. Go online at DeSantoPropane.com for more info or call toll-free at 1-800-752-4574. Since 1937, the difference has been DeSanto Propane.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Debrief podcast. Josh Durso, Jackie Augustine here inside the FingerLakes1.com studio. Fall is upon us. It is bitter cold outside.
Snow is upon us.
Snow is upon us.
At least when I was walking in, snow was upon me.
It's here, which also means election season is over, which is one of the reasons why we are here today to talk about everything that happened. A local election year, so while not getting the national headlines, certainly one of the more important election cycles that we've had in the last few years. A lot to get to, a lot of races to talk about, a lot of outcomes to talk about. We also have some just general headlines to break down as well this hour. But let's start with expectations. It was so interesting. All of the conversations I was having with folks in local government across the region coming into election day, widely different expectations. Some people were very hopeful. Some people were very discouraged. Some people felt it seemed kind of like, meh, whatever. How did you feel coming into this particular cycle?
I guess curious. I was interested to see kind of what the turnout would be and what issues were resonating with people on a local level, how much of the kind of national discussion and discord was going to kind of make its way into local politics. I think for the most part, I mean, just from like a Geneva-centric perspective, I think that national politics was not on the table. I think it attempted to be, there were some mailers that went out that were somewhat controversial that said, stop the Democrats or you'll have national politics on a local level. But apparently that did not resonate with people. So I feel like people were, I don't want to read too much into it, but I tend to be optimistic. So I feel like my read of it was that people just want serious elected officials who want to have policy discussions and not just the personality conflicts that we've been seeing. But that, again, that's just my Geneva-centric perspective on things.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think for me coming into it, it felt very much like people just wanted to see results.
Yeah.
People just wanted to see action, whether it was just because of they're like a single issue voter or whether they're voting on the whole suite of things that are going on in their community. It felt very much like people were tired of kind of like a nothing happening kind of vibe and wanting to see some real tangible stuff get done. Obviously, there are a lot of, and we'll wind up talking about this throughout the episode today, but there's a lot of state and federal stuff happening that is impacting the local side of politics that unfortunately local elected officials don't have much control over.
Right.
So there's that. And, I was very curious to see how incumbents were going to do coming into this because it's been a very volatile couple of years in politics in general. And it wasn't great.
Yeah.
It wasn't great for incumbents. So we'll be touching on that quite a bit. The first race, obviously, that we have to talk about is a big one for Ontario County. Jared Simpson, Canandaigua Town Supervisor, now down by 14 votes. Obviously, these results are not final yet, but the Democrat challenger there, Don Cotter, he's in front now by 14 votes, as I said. It's within the mandatory hand recount threshold, so that has to happen. Election officials, I believe a couple days ago, or as of Friday's update, said that wasn't going to happen until after Thanksgiving. So these results will not be final, but it appears as though this is going to be the outcome of the race. tons of, in my opinion, that could have been the most consequential race in the whole region. Not to put too much on Ontario County, but I think it was. Yeah. Looking at the likely results and outcome now, what's your big takeaway, I guess?
Well, I have to say, I'm sad to see Jared Simpson go. I thought that his leadership on the board was sensible, professional. I mean, if you're talking about results, I mean, the vote to close the landfill, the advocacy for housing, I think that those things were, now I will say, I don't know, I really don't know anything about his role as, a supervisor for the town of Canandaigua. I'm only looking at the perspective of him as a leader of the county board of supervisors. But so, I mean, I don't mean to comment on like any handling of like Canandaigua specific issues, but I really think that he brought a level-headedness to the county board of supervisors that I felt had been previously lacking. And I do think that I, as most people know, am usually very critical of the western side of the county for really not getting it, for not understanding the real issues, the economic issues, the housing issues, the social issues of Ontario County. Victor, Bloomfield, some of the other west side communities think, hey, everything's great. What's the problem? And they don't really take that countywide perspective. And I thought that Jared Simpson came to, there were a lot of economic development forums. He was there in ways that I hadn't seen past chairs attend. And I just thought, wow, like he's actually engaged in county governing. So I guess, there's still a recount to be had, sure. But yeah, I was sad, and I'm certainly sympathetic to his loss by 14 votes. I mean, that's a number that, yeah.
Right. It hits a little close to home. It's a little close to home, I suppose. I was trying to recall, what was the year where there was a lot of turnover on Geneva City Council?
Well, when's there been a year that there hasn't been?
There was a year where it was almost an entire shift.
Right. That was 4 years ago.
Okay. So it has a similar, so the implications for this race, and obviously there were a lot of other town supervisor contests in Ontario County, but I was looking at it over the weekend, and I think around 40% of the board is either new or changing in some way, shape, or form. You lose a lot of institutional knowledge.
Yes.
And the question becomes, for me, the implication is, how will this new board govern?
Yeah.
How will everyone coming in, not just new folks or people who won elections this time, but folks who maybe weren't on the ballot or won another term, will they be coming in with the right mindset, because there's going to be more work to be done this time?
Yeah, and first I should correct myself. I believe it was 6 years ago. I don't do well with time. Wasn't it 2000, 2 years ago? No. Okay. So anyway, so please take my years with a grain of salt here. But yeah, I mean, I do think that's a concern because institutional knowledge does matter, but a learning curve can be overcome by hardworking, dedicated officials who hopefully have been doing some reading before they get there, right? Who now, in the time between the election and inauguration, right? Whatever we call that on the local level, are observing what's going on, attending meetings, getting the formality, the rhythm of what's going to happen, and also like making a plan. Because the worst thing that could happen is if people get into office and they're just like, all right, tell me how this thing runs. Like, who's in charge here? What's happening? Which unfortunately, I think is what plagued the most recent city council, because But for the mayor, I mean, you had a group of people who'd never, barely attended a meeting, let alone served on a board or commission or something coming in. Now, you also had 2 longtime city staff people joining the council, so that was good. But that's not the massive turnover election that you were talking about. We were going a bit further back, but I do think that the people say, oh, I don't have an agenda. No. Elected officials need to have an agenda. They need to say, here is the work that my community needs done, and I'm getting ready to do it. So let's be clear. Having an agenda is a good thing for elected officials.
And I would also say too, like one of the things that I think about when there is this kind of turnover is everybody has strengths, right? And I think this is the time when everyone watching the Board of Supervisors over the first like 6 to 8 months of 2026, I'm sure they'll give them some grace and say, you know, there is a learning curve, and I'm sure they will get to it and get down to governing. But also at the same time, everyone has strengths, and I hope that, you know, whether it's issue by issue basis or whether it is just an experience standpoint, whatever the case may be, I hope that there is sort of that expertise drill down for the county, because that is, with the number of things that Ontario County is trying to push the envelope on, thinking of housing, thinking of economic development, thinking of the various challenges east to west that it has had over the last, not just 4 years, 6 years, 8 years. It will be important to continue that so that progress can continue to be made.
Can I make one more comment before we leave this topic?
Sure.
And again, I hate to keep saying this, but I would be remiss if we talked about county government and I didn't make the point again that I really hope that, just focusing on Ontario County, but I think this is the same for any of our surrounding neighbors who have Board of Supervisors versus county legislatures, that they need to be taking this regional whole county approach. The days of parochial insular governing, of saying, as long as things are fine in my community, that's all that matters, and the inability to understand that we are a regional system. I mean, it goes beyond the county, but if we could just get people to look at their counties, that would be, as a whole, that would be a great start. But having a Board of Supervisors function for the benefit of the county as a whole and not just their territorial interest would be a great step forward. And I think Ontario County was starting to do that, and I just hope that can continue. That's my hope.
One other just random note here on this particular governing entity. I think this will be the most politically split or evenly split Board of Supervisors in Ontario County in quite a while in terms of Democrats and Republicans. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out, how that works out. Could be a great example for every other governing body around to see
so, yes.
if both sides are able to really work together and keep momentum going in the areas that they have had momentum over the last 4 years. But let's talk about some other races. Geneva and Canandaigua City Council contests. Democrats ran the table, I believe in both cities, setting up a new look government for both. You know, this is one of those situations where, for me, Democrats didn't just do really well in the cities. They did well in places they hadn't done well, you know, ever, basically, or in a very long time. So does this change anything for Geneva or Canandaigua when you see something like that happen, where one party sweeps? Because one of the concerns that I have is taking a little too much from it, assuming too much from it, and maybe taking those seats for granted in the future.
Yeah, and I would say Canandaigua and Geneva are two very different political beasts because in Canandaigua, they have the Democrats that were elected to the Canandaigua City Council were Democrats. In Geneva, we're having this like weird titling contest, apparently, where you've got people that were on the Democratic ticket that weren't endorsed by the Democratic committee. You've got people who were running on the Republican ticket who are registered Democrats. I mean, it was like all over the map, which to me just reinforces the point that in a city, there is not a Democratic way and a Republican way to govern. There is sensible, directed policy, which I happen to think in recent elections has been captured by the actual endorsed Democrats. And then there is the group that wants to hold office and wants someone else to do the work, which I think in Geneva has been the people who the Democrats have not been willing to endorse. But I think, to the community at large, people are going to say, wow, well, now we finally have a Democratic council. So I just think it's a call for people to pay closer attention to what's actually happening, to attend meetings, to watch the meetings if they can't attend directly, and to keep in communication with their elected officials to make sure that whatever kind of party mantle they're trying to hold up, they're doing the work. Because I think everyone can agree, regardless of party affiliation, that there is a lot of work to be done in the Finger Lakes on the issues you just mentioned, housing, economic development, which I think are identical. Housing is economic development, but all kinds of land use and programmatic things that are slowing down. I mean, people don't want to acknowledge that, but there has been a slowdown. Part of it, as you pointed out in your very excellently argued column that just came out over the weekend, the idea that when faced with change, when faced with projects, it's still too scary for people to say yes, and saying no has consequences.
Yeah, it is very much like, and I think this is, take party affiliation completely out of it. Like,
right.
You're going to see a theme the rest of this podcast now that we've gotten through these first two topics. Maintaining the status quo is not good enough. Not for anyone trying to survive in the Finger Lakes anymore. It just isn't. And, people want to see results. And that's why, as much as I think I've listened to some people talk about this being a huge year for Democrats. It was a great year. It was a great cycle for Democrats. I think it's more about incumbency and people being generally frustrated with what they've seen out of local government over the last several years, not just very recently, and genuinely wanting to see major change.
Yeah.
And whether it is a separate thing entirely, theme I keep coming back to, whether local elected officials really have all the power they need to actually change the things that a lot of people are frustrated by day in and day out. That's a separate issue, right? But no matter what, I think local electeds are going to continue wearing it and having to wear it, even if they don't have the ability to necessarily change some of the things that are getting people riled up and ready to see change and elect different people and different parties and things like that.
Well, I mean, it just popped into my head here. I think as you were talking, that makes me think that there was this frustration with the repeated mantra of general incumbents at the time that, well, things just go up. This is just how it happens, right? Yeah, taxes are going up. That's just how it goes. And I think it's not just that people were upset that taxes were going up. I think people could understand if economic realities being what they are, things are going up. However, it's that kind of passive, well, this is just how it happens to us, versus like, why can't we say, if things are going up, we also want things to get better. And getting better requires activity, ideas, creativity, nimbleness. And you don't see, if you tuned in to a Geneva City Council meeting in the past year, none of those adjectives would apply. It was status quo, just reticence, arguing for argument's sake, no real ideas. And it's frustrating. I think maybe people are sick of that this kind of attitude of, oh, well, kind of Eeyore government, things are going to happen, everything's bad. I think people are ready for like some energy and some ideas.
Yeah, and I will say, I think we're at a point where ideas aren't enough. I think you need more than ideas at this point. You need to be able to execute on those ideas.
Yes, fair point, fair point.
I think one of the biggest for anyone who's newly elected, I would actually say take the under promise over deliver approach. Don't promise the biggest grandest change in the next 2 to 4 years, because 2 to 4 years goes by fast, especially in local government when you're only meeting once a month, or only are making real decisions on resolutions that require some serious brain power and staff execution, maybe couple times a year, or maybe once a year if it coincides with the budget cycle.
Right.
So, keep that in mind as well. Let's talk about one of, I don't know, this, to me, this has potential of being the biggest story of 2025, Greenidge.
Okay.
And it wasn't just the Greenidge decision, but as it turns out, 2 decisions that came down about a week and a half ago at the end of the week. Governor Kathy Hochul and the state approved a new gas pipeline near New York City and renewed Greenidge Generation's air permit on Seneca Lake. This was a pretty big reversal from prior state positions, which obviously frustrated environmental groups. Critics called it a betrayal of the state's climate goals, while Hochul defended the moves as necessary for energy reliability. The decisions also come as she's facing a primary challenge from Lieutenant Governor Antonio Delgado as well. So very interesting dynamic there. Came seemingly out of nowhere, although having sort of watched and listened to the energy debate or energy conversation politically over the last several months, pausing the natural gas portion of the state's requirements that were set to start in the beginning of 2026. Saw that coming. So not surprised by that. Very surprised that this was sort of dropped like a bomb out of nowhere on a Friday afternoon.
Completely unexpected.
I think the announcement literally came down at like 3:30 p.m. on a Friday, which if you work in the media world or if you work in PR, you know if you're dropping something then, it's not a great thing. Yeah. So I guess let's just start with reaction. What is your reaction to it coming out of left field, and what the implication is of this news now?
Well, let me add my environmental justice hat to my local government hat and say this is a bad decision. It is harmful to our community. It completely blindsided those of us who've been following this issue, who thought that after the court decision that this is not how this issue was going to be resolved. And I just want to push back on the idea that somehow the Greenidge facility is helping the energy issues of the area, because I don't find any data. And I'm not like trying to armchair quarterback this and just say, my gut tells me this is a bad idea. But I'm saying actually, if you look at the issue, there is not evidence that facility assists with our energy grid in any way. In fact, the energy it's generating is being used on site for its own operations and we can talk about the air emissions, but also putting a strain on our lake. Right now, everybody knows we're in a drought condition. If you go down and you look at Seneca Lake, it's lower than I ever remember it being. That puts us at a higher risk for harmful algal blooms, which we saw again this summer, which aren't going to go away anytime soon. In the issue, right? I understand in the winter they might go away, but so a facility that in so many ways presents an environmental threat to the Finger Lakes and to the not just the public health concerns, which are top of mind for me, but the economic development concerns, which you'd think would be top of mind for the state. I don't understand the decision at all. I don't support it at all. Obviously, I guess I didn't need to say that, but I just I don't understand it. There is no trade-off. I mean, there's no way to even say that this is helpful or necessary. It's just a bad move. It's just a bad idea.
What do you think this is the thing that I've been wrestling with. What do you think the political calculation was from the state or Governor Hochul or whoever ultimately was making a political calculation out of this? Because this, to me, was a political calculation.
Well, here's what I think the political calculation is for many of our environmental issues around here. If you look at the political landscape, we've got some people who support these endeavors locally, who see them as economic development, who want to talk about jobs and talk about the landfills as well, right? People come out and say, oh, we need this, it's helpful, it contributes to the community. So I think that from a statewide perspective, if you've got a community that looks like there's enough people willing to tolerate it, and this has to happen somewhere, we're the ones who are going to get it. And that's why if we can't get our act together at the local level and speak with one voice that these are actually environmentally damaging, health threatening, livelihood threatening, business threatening endeavors, we're just going to keep getting dumped on over and over again. Any well-heeled business interest who says, hey, I want to be able to operate somewhere is going to pick an area that doesn't put up a fight. Now, I will say in deference to the many organizations that have been putting up a fight, I don't want to minimize their efforts at all, because obviously that is important and great and needs to continue. But at the local government level, there needs to be more opposition to this, like active, not willing to say, well, I guess if they pay us enough, we'll take it. Like, no, enough.
Yeah, and I will say this is of all the environmental activism that happens in the Finger Lakes, some of the most organized environmental activism was happening around this issue.
Oh yeah, I mean, Seneca Lake Guardian is out there. Yeah.
Yeah, to see the state
Yep.
make the decision they made, it feels like a very consequential, future defining decision. Because to me it shows, and this might be a smidge on the cynical side, but it shows that no matter what how well organized or how much of a fight a sizable group of folks puts up, the state can still decide to do whatever it decides to do. And I only say that because this is the thing that, since I wrote my very first column for the Finger Lakes Times 12 years ago, and I was a reporter after that here, Finger Lakes 1, and I was always like preaching and trying to dig into this philosophy of like local electeds need to act and need to basically be on their toes ahead of the state.
Yep.
You need to be ahead of the state so that when the state comes to you and says, we're going to do this, you have something to show for it, basically. And I'm always typically it was always talking about economic development and talking about dissolving the smallest forms of government, because that is the direction the state is ultimately headed as population declines and things like that. But same with this, without any kind of like real unified action, without any real organized local government, you end up with a lot of things that just sort of happen to communities rather than communities that are ready for different scenarios or possible outcomes.
Right. That is that passive disposition that I was talking about, earlier, and it applies here as well. Is this community, are these elected officials willing to accept that the Finger Lakes is the sacrifice zone for environmental degradation? Because that is the message we're being sent from the state. It's got to go somewhere. Let's put it here. And at some point, I'd love for our elected officials to say, sorry, that's not who we are. We have a different narrative. We have a different direction. We can prove to you that we're actually efficient in getting things done. And then, it just, well, okay, I'll end my rant on that.
It's well, and so the context here is we're about to talk about Seneca Falls, and the context here, um, some of the concern that I've heard is that this decision could have potentially been an indicator of how the state is going to ultimately decide on Seneca Meadows, and I think I think there are definitely some strands of connectivity there. I'm not saying that I have no idea, right? No one actually knows what the state's going to decide. But if it's up to Albany and that conversation and that deal is being worked out in a back room, I think there's probably a higher likelihood that Seneca Meadows is able to get its extension through 2040 and continue operating. There's quite an involved process in extending the landfill's state permit, and not very much has happened in the public eye so far. And we are closing in on what is the end of the current permit and what would be the start of a new one. So it's a very unique situation. These environmental issues, because it almost feels like in a lot of cases we skip the public input part for a deal to be made in Albany between the private entity, the corporate entity, and state leaders, and that's just, it sort of cuts out the local side of it.
Yeah, and I guess for me, the landfill issue, I think I don't want to predict how that is going to go, and I don't have any insight into how that's going to go. But I will say this: the regulations that currently exist do not favor our position, our local position of opposition, right? And the problem with that is that we, as a local community, have fought a political fight about the landfill and not a regulatory fight enough, right? I think that is picking up steam. I think that's very important. But I can see how the state, I mean, there's like the political fight, there's the regulatory just business that is being done, and then there is the kind of influence that the industry has with other people who might be decision makers at other points of the process. And the worry is you've got a kind of milquetoast position from the town where it's like, well, how much you want to pay us? Maybe we'll talk about it. So, I mean, the state is not getting a clear sense from the elected officials that this is an intolerable condition that must stop completely, right? It looks like the town is saying, well, make it worth our while somehow, which is not a great negotiating position. And then you've got, the community with, again, Seneca Lake Guardian at the front of this, very well organized, saying, no, under no circumstances will we allow expansion, which is excellent, but needs to be echoed by the elected officials, which is the missing piece. Yep. And I think then you've got, state regulators who are just like, well, the language of the permit would allow this. I mean, if they can comply with that, our hands are kind of tied. And then you've got the industry, which isn't playing softball here. Like, they know they're in the game, and the local elected officials can't. I don't want to say they can't compete. They could, but they choose not to. They take a very passive position, and it puts us at a regional disadvantage because we end up looking like we'll tolerate things that we shouldn't. And I think, maybe that's the thread that's running through our discussions today, that maybe these elections, again, an optimistic read, is that people are sick of people who just tolerate bad stuff.
And it goes without saying, too, that people will tolerate a lot if they feel like things are on a decent trajectory, right? That's kind of that's one of my big takeaways from it, just politics in general. People are willing to tolerate higher taxes. They're willing to tolerate, maybe a slightly dysfunctional looking local government or governing body if they feel like things are going the right direction, if they feel like life is getting better for
Right.
the folks involved. That clearly not the case in Seneca Falls, where a couple weeks ago, a resident-led petition calling for a no confidence vote in town supervisor Frank Schmitter was presented. It cited labor disputes, the landfill controversy, and then the budget process, which is still unfolding as we speak. There's a public hearing tonight.
Same night as the vote.
Yeah, which again, local government thing, right? Like it's just how it goes. There was an argument made over the weekend, or some concerns raised about whether proper notice was given for this meeting. Lots of questions. There were lots of comments on Facebook about this. Lots of emails. Something that I think is really important to notice, if we want to talk about a through line. I'm old enough to remember when two supervisors ago in the town of Seneca Falls, there was a no confidence vote. There was widespread frustration in lots of things like that. Again, people want functional government. They want, here's one of the things that I always point to with Seneca Falls. Seneca Falls is unique because it has residents that apparently know what they want and show up to meetings and make those desires heard regularly. Is there a lot of ongoing discussion about landfill? Yes, but there's also a lot of discussion about a lot of other things too.
Yep.
Unionizing employees, like the town's workforce, municipal stuff like nuts and bolts. It's an engaged citizenry compared to most municipalities of its size. And this is kind of a situation of what can happen when certain processes, like the budget process, feel very convoluted or complicated. And that's exactly what's happened here. This budget process, even just reading the minutes of meetings without even, taking the emotion out of it, because I think if you watch the meeting videos, there's a lot of emotion in these. These are very emotionally charged debates and conversations and public comment sessions. Pull all of that out of it. At the end of the day, there's a lot of mechanical stuff that people want to see more out of the town than what they're getting. So, you've kind of been, I've been tagging you in with some of I've been forwarding you articles and emails and all kinds of stuff. What's your perspective on what we're seeing in Seneca Falls?
Well, first, I feel like I learned an awful lot about town law because, under New York State, municipal law is different for cities than it is for towns and villages. So I feel like I had a crash course in town law in terms of notice guidelines and even budget release dates. It's like a whole new world, but it's interesting. So I appreciate you looping me in on that. But I think, speaking to the point about heightened emotions, I think you see that happen, and I mean, Geneva, no different. I think you see that happen when there is confusion, right? When things are not predictable, when things are not professional. And by professional, I don't mean that, I'm not like insulting people and saying, oh, you're unprofessional. I'm saying there is a professional way to govern. There are criteria and procedures that make things professionalized, that make people feel reassured that things are being done correctly, that there is a deliberative process that makes sense, that is forecast and abided by. And that is missing in Seneca Falls. And I think it's no surprise, really, because I hate to break it to Seneca Falls, and I'm sorry if this hurts people's feelings, but Seneca Falls has some big issues that need some serious brain power applied to them. And that means you need people who have time to think about, to digest, to examine, to research these issues. And you've got a very part-time board and I mean that in terms of like the amount of time people have to dedicate to the work. And they're trying to run a like cruise ship with sailboat dinghy staff. You know what I mean? Like it's really like Seneca Falls has outgrown its governing model, if you ask me. That is just, and I think until, like you said, there's a lot of community intelligence, engagement, like passion there. And that needs to translate into a more thorough, disciplined, focused governing body that just hasn't caught up with itself.
Yeah, and
I mean that in the politest way.
Sure, and you know what? I'm just going to look at this from the only part I'm going to talk about is just sort of the nuts and bolts of town law.
Yes.
And what people's expectations are of it. I'm not even going to talk about what town law says, because again, you immediately enter this arena of interpretation.
Right.
And one legal expert will say this, another legal expert will say that. The state,
one self-proclaimed expert will say something totally different.
the state has some resources available where there have been essentially opinions on various aspects of town law and municipal law in general, which are great to read, very interesting. But here's the thing. No matter what the law says, the only check, unfortunately, and this is something that to me is really troubling with local government in general, the only check that really exists is not local residents, it's not one party or another party, it's an Article 78.
Yep.
And short of a legal fight, like a legitimate legal fight, an Article 78 is an actual, like, think of it as, in lay terms, you're suing the governing body for not following proper procedure. Short of that, and it's not a great mechanism because it doesn't really, it's not a great path for someone who just wants to see their local governing body, their town, their village, their city do things right, because it's time consuming. It takes a long time to play out. It can take years for an Article 78 to reach resolution. And when it comes to things like this, that's why it's always just better for residents to show up early, often, all year preferably, and make their voices heard, because that is a far better method of trying to turn your local town board in the direction you want to see it, or, to get the will of the people executed, than the legal processes that exist for holding government accountable, because there really isn't anything outside of that. So I say that so people can sort of have measured expectations when they think about, well, geez, the town didn't, according to this interpretation, the town didn't follow X, Y, and Z protocol. How's that legal? Well, it doesn't really matter. If they adopt a budget and they turn the budget into the state on time, there isn't really anything, the state's not going to ask any other questions.
Right, there's no recourse at that point.
Also, as we've seen with a lot of these other issues, state agencies aren't exactly swimming in excess staff to do, in-depth work on how local municipalities are working. So, expecting someone from Albany to come down and say, geez, Seneca Falls, you aren't doing this right. You didn't follow procedure. It's just never going to happen. You might see it in an audit, like comptroller audit,
down the line,
5 years
right.
down the line. But at that point, the damage is done, right? It's over. So just something to keep in mind. And, like I said, if you are one of the people who are showing up to these meetings, and let me just say, sitting through some of these meetings, if you are a resident who cares about something, is painstaking. It takes a long time. They're often clunky. They feel disorganized, especially if you don't go to the meetings on a regular basis, if you don't know the flow of how they're going. You're probably going to end up spending a couple hours at that meeting. I would say as a follow-up piece to that, if you're willing to dedicate 2 to 3 hours of your busy life going to a meeting, spend 15 to 20 just reading some of the opinions and actual town law, the rules of town law at the state level, just so you understand better how it actually works.
And then it sounds like you would be ready to run for office because, I mean, this is the thing. I see so many community members putting in the work to learn the law, to follow proper procedure, to hold people accountable. And then I say sometimes to people like, you should run. Oh, I don't want to do that. I'm not interested in that. And I said, you know what? If you don't, you're going to be governed by people who don't want to do this work. So, I mean.
And the only reason why I said what I said is because going to a town board meeting or a city council meeting is not a small time commitment.
Yep.
Even if you're only doing it once a month, we're talking about dedicating 2 to maybe 4.5 hours of time to it. So spend 10 to 20 outside of that, actually like picking up some of the details that frankly, I think a lot of even elected officials don't pay that much attention to or aren't that like knowledgeable of, because it'll help you understand what guide rails actually exist for local government, and it'll put you in a better position to understand what's going on. And again, to be able to make a sound, logical argument that isn't emotionally charged
Yes.
about the issues that you care about. So yeah. Staying in Seneca County, most listeners here have probably heard about the contract fight that's been shaking out now for several months between the Seneca County Sheriff's Office's PBA, the Deputies Union, and the Board of Supervisors. Age-old debate, as it turns out. County leaders are saying they can't afford the contract that the deputies are requesting. The PBA says the money is there, you can. And, you know, department morale and retention has been spotlighted. The sheriff's office has lost something like 100 deputies to surrounding counties and law enforcement agencies because of the pay discrepancy that exists between Seneca County and surrounding counties. And there's so much to this issue, right? Like communities of all sizes are trying to figure out how to balance increased cost to maintain services, a shrinking population, and a desire from residents to not only maintain or bolster services like fire, like police, like EMS, but also hold the line on taxes.
Right.
It is a perfect storm, and it's interesting because like we've had examples of this in so many different arenas now that I get really frustrated listening to it, because let me level here. One of my biggest frustrations with Seneca County in particular is you're already operating at a baseline deficiency if you're an economic development person, or if you're trying to find ways to grow the county, right? Because you're competing with Ontario County,
Right.
who has the benefit of a really good organizational structure and, you know, wins to go along with it. Far more housing. But then on the east side, you're also competing with Cayuga County, which is poised to see a really significant influx from Micron.
Right.
And with all of these services that residents clearly want maintained, you have a lot of elected officials who have spent decades now running on the "I will keep your taxes low"
Right.
line. And I want to say this too. I have seen Democrats and Republicans run on that "I will keep your taxes low"
Right.
line. It works right up until it doesn't. Because then when it comes to something like public safety, which is not a clean well, we have 10% less people living here than we did in 2008 or 2010, whatever. That doesn't mean you have 10% less of a public safety problem. Public safety is, so much of public safety is perception. Public safety is not just policing, but also other things as well. And the cost of all of the things have continued to go up.
Right.
And it's one of those situations where I think this is a great case study for anyone looking to run for office in 2026 and beyond, to not run on the "I will keep your taxes low" mantra, because if you do, you are going to very quickly find out that maintaining the services that voters around here care about is very expensive, and promising that you will keep taxes low while maintaining the same level of service is a very bad proposition to put up. It's part of that's my soapbox.
I feel like you covered it. I mean, I don't have a whole lot more to say that you have not covered there. I guess the only other thing I would say is that, and this is the same like in Geneva as well, like I'm still kind of perplexed by the fact that Geneva does not have an EMS service given the aging population that we have just demographically. But I think this is the point. In each locale, demographics have shifted, population has shifted, yet the core functions remain the same, and we just keep trying to figure out how to keep doing the same thing for less money, which is a losing proposition every time. But the conversations are so charged that if you want to see reason and rationality leave the room running, just start talking about, is there a different way we might approach public safety, policing, and it's just everybody's hackles go up. It's very emotional. And so we get stuck in this situation where the only thing we can see is keep doing what we're doing, and how do we pay for it? And that dynamic, as long as we stay locked into that, is going to perpetually create exactly the problem that Seneca County is facing right now. And if they're not willing to have a different conversation, they just need to pay up. They just need to say, you know what, we're locked into this model. This is what we've decided is going to happen in perpetuity, so we have to pay for it. But you can't have it both ways. You can't say keep it as is, but don't pay for it. Like that doesn't work.
Yeah, and I think very well said. And I wrote a column about that, the whole you can't have it both ways, because that's the crux of the issue here. But I think my biggest takeaway from seeing the reaction to the stories on Finger Lakes One and the Finger Lakes Times and the coverage of the issue, and some of the emails that I've gotten after a couple of the columns that I've written, is the consensus seems to be that people are happy with how the sheriff's office operates. They're happy with its leadership. They're happy with the job the deputies do. They want to see the deputies paid so there isn't this turnover, so that the sheriff's office isn't a training ground for every other sheriff's office around or police department around. So pay for it. Like, I don't think, and this is the thing that gets a little frustrating. Sometimes I think electeds get so caught up in we must hold the line on spending no matter what, that they actually lose sight of the areas where their constituents are telling them that they do want them to spend. And philosophically, does the way we police need to change, or are there areas and ways it can be done more efficiently, or whatever the case may be? To me, that ends up being a completely separate conversation, because I think the response so far to this has been overwhelmingly pay the deputies. and the consequences of that, maybe it's a tax increase at some point in the future. Maybe it's not. Maybe find a way to fund it in the future, whatever the case may be. But the status quo, again, not what people want to see. So people don't want to see this continue churn in the sheriff's office where people are just exiting.
Yeah, and I think Geneva's best mayor, Stu Einstein, had a committee, Value for the Taxpayer Dollar, which our current mayor, Steve Valentino, sat on, and I think and understood that taxes are a value proposition to the taxpayer, right? What you're saying is, we want to raise this amount of money that you're contributing your portion to, and for that, this is what the community will be provided. And to your point, if you're aligning with what the community is expecting, then people understand that the cost translated to achieve that is going to result in a tax bill that might go up. But when people feel that the things they want to see are not the things being invested in, and the taxes are still going up, that's when you get this disconnect that elected officials only seem to be able to digest and try to solve by saying, oh, then we'll just hold the line on taxes. And they never engage in the value proposition discussion because it feels, well, I think because it requires extra work. It requires digging in and asking questions and sometimes having difficult conversations, but it requires time, effort, thought, research that until a community is willing to put in that work, the output is going to be substandard. The output is not going to be what people want. You're not going to hit that balance where people feel like their tax dollars are well spent. I mean, some people just don't like taxes. You're never going to satisfy them. I'm not saying everyone will be happy, but the consensus around, is this a well-functioning government? Is stuff going well? Is our money being invested the way we would like for the return in our community experience? You could get to a consensus that things are better, but it's hard. It's hard work.
It is. And I think one of the takeaways from that mindset is the communities that go that road, that actually weigh the value and actually put some thought into it, wind up seeing other benefits too. Economic development. I'm talking about economic development when I say that. Yeah. Because as it turns out, the places where residents are satisfied, taxpayers are satisfied, taxpayers feel like they're getting an adequate bang for their buck, you see economic growth in those places. It is not, they are not disconnected. And the places where you don't see that value proposition, you don't see the growth.
And, here's a perfect example. You talked about Micron earlier. The people coming in from Micron, it's not a race to the bottom. They're not saying, what's the cheapest community I could live in? Now, some people might think that, right? People right now living around here might say, oh, well, the taxes are too high there. Like, why is Skinny Atlas a choice community, even though it's very expensive, right? Because people have determined that the quality of life is worth the amount that is being paid. The discontent you see in other communities, not to call anybody out in particular, is that the quality of life is lower, but it's still very expensive to live there. So the point is, I think elected officials miss their role, like you were saying, in the economic development scheme of understanding that people who have the ability to move into your community will select you if you are a community of choice, and they will avoid you if you do not have this value proposition correct. And instead, we've got people who say, well, we just need to bring taxes down. And I will admit, full disclosure, I have been in the camp of, okay, we got to get a handle on taxes. But it's not because full stop, I think there's some set number you can't go above. It's because I keep trying to point out we don't have this correct ratio. We don't have that value proposition correct. And we can't afford higher taxes if we're not investing in the right kind of services. And that is a more nuanced argument that I think sometimes gets lost on people because they just say, bring the number down at all costs. And it's like, no, you don't want to see a community with low taxes at all costs. It's not a place you're going to want to live.
Yeah, no, absolutely not. Speaking of a lot of the things that we were just talking about there, pro housing in the Finger Lakes. So the state rolled out this program, I think like 2 or 3 years ago, where essentially communities are able to vie for pro housing status, which is essentially just a state sanctioned, this community is open to new housing category. Also opens the door for a bunch of state funding to handle some infrastructure things and stuff like that. We've seen sort of this like trickle of communities getting added to the list across the Finger Lakes, and I just wanted to talk a little bit about what it means, like in real terms, not just like the press releases that we get from Albany. And I also wanted to show the map so people could see, thank you, Paul, could actually see what communities. So looking at the map right there, any community that is in green is a pro-housing community, meaning votes done, state's already accepted the application, case closed. Communities in blue are in the process, so they'll likely be green in the next, say, year or so. It's interesting because as you go through, and this map, we'll link to the map on the website on fingerlakes1.com, but it's really interesting because this map, as you drill into it, most of the communities that are highlighted in green are the places where you have seen housing in the headlines over the last year to 2 years. Whether it be communities that have acknowledged that they have a very big housing shortage, or that housing costs, whether it be rental or home ownership, are wildly out of pace with, or out of step with what the average resident is earning. And it's interesting because housing is the issue. Like, housing is the issue of our time, in my opinion. And I think that tracks with sort of what we're seeing, not just locally, but beyond.
Yes.
It's funny, I get a lot of notifications from the various real estate companies about properties that are for sale across the Finger Lakes in different zip codes. And I like to get them because I like to just see where the numbers are, right? And for the heck of it, I clicked on a couple over the weekend, some properties here in Seneca Falls and Waterloo. And just to see, like, what are they, how much are they selling for, what are they assessed at, what did they recently sell at?
Right.
And it was very interesting because I clicked on 4, and they were very run-of-the-mill, what we would consider to be like middle-of-the-market housing. Ranch homes sort of filling that, we'll say, small to medium-sized family home that would have been not a starter home, but like a raising kids home.
Okay.
And Waterloo and Seneca Falls, homes in the upper 2s to low 3s, and assessments in like the 125 to 150 range, and having been sold in the last like 5 to 7 years for 160, 170, 180. Housing is an issue. Like, that those numbers only happen when you have a massive housing shortage. Why does that matter? Well, because the entire region is facing a housing shortage, and the state is putting some money on the line to get communities to actually approve and greenlight more units, whether they're rentals or for purchase. All of those things are moving the right direction, but we're seeing one issue, power, completely stifle that energy. And Ontario County is seeing this play out in the worst way imaginable, where you have the Uptown Landing project in Canandaigua that is essentially kind of at a standstill right now, all because of power. And that is one of those scenarios where if we do not have the capacity as a region, forget Ontario County, if we do not have the capacity to add hundreds of units per year, per county, per zip code in some cases, we are going to see this problem escalate to a point where owning a home simply cannot happen for a majority of the population that doesn't already own or is in the process, like in financing a home currently. Like if you are a person who is entering the market from 2026 to 2040, there will be very few winners and a whole lot of losers, because even the people who end up purchasing these homes eventually, either they're going to be so unaffordable that there is a limited pool who can even purchase them, and that's going to bring prices down, or we're going to see an influx of units at some point in the future, and the value will not be like the idea that a home is a permanently increasing in value asset goes away, right? Huge problem. Everyone needs to pay attention to it. I think everybody needs to also take a look at the map and get a sense of, if their community isn't a pro-housing community, what communities around them are, and then also think about the implications of what it means if your community is not paying attention to housing and talking about housing as the number one issue, not just as economic development, not just as strengthening the tax base, which are a lot of the things that we hear about, but just the human existence, the human experience in the Finger Lakes. Unfortunately, I don't think that conversation is happening as loudly or as frequently as it should be.
You know what would be really interesting as a visual is if you could superimpose on the pro-housing community map the map of like the current state of the electrical grid, because I think that we have like a bigger question to, you know, NYSEG, RG&E, you know, Avangrid as a whole, Iberdrola, or however you pronounce it, whatever, you know, this one entity that is controlling our electrical grid and our energy. Why, when rates continue to go up and skyrocket, is there not a requisite investment in the transmission system and the capacity that would actually, I mean, where is the state regulation intervention, or, I mean, maybe that's a federal question, you know, where is that? And how do we make sure that before you can be a pro-housing community, that you actually have the infrastructure to be able, and that's not something that these individual communities are going to be able to do on their own, right? What is Geneva going to do to improve its electrical grid? Like that seems to me beyond the scope of a city council.
Oh, it is.
And, you know, I understand Fairport's in a different position, right? And maybe we should have followed their lead a long time ago. There is Councilor Ken Camera who hammered on that point 20 years ago.
Yep.
But we don't have any grid independence. We don't have any redundancy built into our system. And how does the pro-housing community designation maybe encourage some of the municipalities to work together and say, look it, yeah, great, we've achieved this, we're serious, we want to do something, and now what will be done for us in regard to making that an actual possibility? Because otherwise, it just looks like a paper designation with no real substance behind it. And I understand that I don't mean to say that there's no value in the pro-housing designation, because I'm glad to see that local communities are doing what's needed. But there are these underlying issues that state money for building cannot overcome. And the question then is, so where do we go from here? Are we going to have to be satisfied with putting a single family home on a lot that otherwise could have had 10 townhomes, where you would have had people meaningfully having ownership, right? I don't know. I just feel
So-
like this is another way that we end up with bad housing options as opposed to robust housing options.
I would take it a step further and say that this is one of the reasons why we will just see fewer housing options, period,
Okay, well,
other than the ones that currently exist, especially here in the Finger Lakes. That entity that you wondered about that could potentially, actually hold Iberdrola accountable, that's the Public Service Commission. And as it turns out, if you look at the energy the state put into the pro-housing community designation, I don't really think it was on their radar that power would be such a problem, especially in upstate New York. Western New York and the North Country are two areas of New York State that are in particularly bad shape when it comes to that. Again, it is a bit of a paper designation. It does open the door for some state money in terms of building out infrastructure. Ironically enough, not electrical it wasn't intended for electrical infrastructure. It was actually intended for the water and sewer and all the other things that come along with building new homes. But it's the situation, and unfortunately, without some intervention at the state level, whether that's the Public Service Commission, whether that's the state and the governor, if the governor wanted to take a stand next year and say we are going to hold, Iberdrola accountable and make sure that they adequately invest in their product, which they are ultimately profiting off of across upstate New York, that would probably be a very popular position to take. But remains to be seen. And until then, what you're left with is a very, as you pointed out, a very scattered approach to housing. Not because there are some very organized housing efforts across the region, whether you're talking about at the town or city level in different parts or entire counties in Ontario's case. But those efforts, without the state stepping in, it's challenging to overcome because, as you said, what is Geneva supposed to do against, a multinational corporation when they have the keys and, unfortunately, the regulatory power as well?
yeah, and once again, you're just going to see a concentration of benefit to the communities that are already doing well and a denial of benefit to communities that are struggling for lack of investment over time. And it perpetuates these disparities that I wish were not the case, right? I mean, I worry about the communities like ours that have some of these substantial infrastructure concerns being left behind by policies like this, and then further exacerbating the problem where the kind of already wealthy, already prosperous communities get to reinforce and lock in that prosperity and bring in more population and continue to benefit, while areas that are really struggling are really left behind by it. So that's my concern on that regard. And in all the topics we talked about, environmentally, housing, economic development, it's all, I mean, again, we're in many ways playing catch up. Some of it we have control over, some of it we don't. But it's time to be serious about this stuff.
Yeah, no doubt. Hey, that is going to do it for this edition of The Debrief. If you liked what you heard, drop a like or subscribe to the YouTube channel. You can also share it with a friend if you're listening on Spotify as well. If you have a question, our email is debrief@fingerlakes1.com. Thanks for coming along. We'll catch you next time.